Good evening, everyone, and good morning to some of you. Thank you for joining us at the last session of City Scripts 2021. My name is Reika Raghunathan, and I'm part of the Word Lab, the team that curates City Scripts. And we're very happy to close the festival with an intercontinental collection of poetic responses written at a time when the pandemic dramatically altered our world. As part of our author and conversation sessions, we welcome the editors and 4 contributing poets of Singing in the Dark, a global anthology of poetry under lockdown. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the final session. Satchidanandan is a poet, playwright, fiction writer, travel writer, editor, and social and literary critic in Malayalam and English, with well over 70 original works and 30 books of translations of poetry from across the world. He has read his poetry and lectured in more than 30 countries in 6 continents and won 51 awards and fellowships, including the Sahitya Academy Award, the Poet Laureate Award from Tata Lit Fest, Knighthood from the Government of Italy, India-Poland Friendship Medal, and the Dante Medal. Satchidanandan has 32 collections of poems in several Indian and foreign languages. Nishi Chawla is an academician and writer. She has 6 collections of poetry, 10 plays, 2 novels, 2 screenplays, and 2 independent movies to her credit. With a PhD in English from the George Washington University in the US, Nishi has taught at the University of Maryland from 1999 until 2014. She is now on the faculty of Thomas Edison State University in New Jersey. Her plays have been staged in India and the US. Anjum Katyal is a writer, editor, and translator. She was chief editor, Seagull Books, and editor, Seagull Theatre Quarterly, Calcutta, web editor, Saregama HMV, and editor, Art and the City. She's the author of several books on theatre and performance and has translated works by Habib Tanvir, Mahashweta Devi, and Meera Mukherjee. She also writes poetry and sings the blues. Asmaa Azaizeh is a poet, performer, and essayist based in Haifa. She's been a journalist for a long time, having worked with Palestinian and Arabic newspapers, and has also been a TV and radio presenter. Asmaa has published 3 poetry collections and has won the Debutante Writer Award from the Al Katan Foundation for her first volume of poetry, Liwa. Her poems have been translated into English and several other languages. Pushcart Prize nominee Sophia Naz has published in numerous literary journals and anthologies over the last 2 decades. Naz's poetry was part of the curriculum of Ethnopoetics in ModPo, Modern and Contemporary American Poetry, an online course offered by the University of Pennsylvania. She has authored 3 poetry collections, Peripheries, Pointillism, and Date Palms, a biography titled Shehnaz, and has a 4th volume of poetry published soon. Sarabjeet is a widely published bilingual poet from India. He's the author of 4 books of poems, including A Clock in the Far Past. He has translated several American poets into Hindi and several Indian poets into English. He has also translated more than 15 Marathi poets into both Hindi and English. Sarabjeet received a 2-year fellowship from the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and is the founder and editorial director of Coppercoin, a multilingual publishing company. Welcome, everybody. And now I'm going to hand it over to Nishi to take us forward. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone in India, and good morning to those in the US. And well, good evening again to Asmaa, who's in Israel or maybe Palestine. Just to briefly introduce our poetry anthology, Singing in the Dark, that includes over 100 poetic voices across the globe, responding to and reflecting on these unprecedented times as we are convulsed in and engulfed within the throes of the pandemic. It's a pretty compelling anthology, that becomes a kind of extended meditation on the very nature of our present reality amidst a pandemic. The diverse community of poets from across the globe that we have selected, they've expressed their sense of transformed reality in acutely sensitive, maybe often tormented poetic images and words. So, coming to the title of our anthology, In the Dark Times, will they also be singing? Yes, they will also be singing about the dark times. We chose the title of an anthology from Bertolt Brecht, who's somehow better known to the English speaking world for his plays, although it was from his poetry that Brecht ventured into drama. Every social and emotional crisis inspires and fosters creative expression. And the poems in our anthology wrestle with the issues confronting and surrounding us now. It's true that having lived through the crisis and the magnitude of this pandemic has changed us all in intangible as well as visible ways, emotionally, psychologically, and socially. Uh, in the midst of the hardship and the challenge, there's been a sense among many people that this period has helped us evaluate our lives and focus on what's truly meaningful. The panic and the despair of our changed lives, the incompleteness sensed in virtual visits and encounters, all of that, of course, the indeterminacy of our foreseeable future, the trauma, and the pain of losing loved ones, and seeing so many suffer, the loss of jobs, as a direct upshot of the lockdown, the newfound appreciation for possible face-to-face interactions and encounters that was previously lost in a world gone virtual. All of these are very tangible social consequences associated with the pandemic. It can even be described as one of the loneliest times for many people when we can reevaluate our wants and needs, our shifting financial priorities, and our sense of what is emotionally necessary. In a sense, all of us have changed, living through and experiencing these unprecedented times as we are forced to re examine our values, our lives, our relationships, and our lifestyles, even while we try to configure a meaningful life of purported design and not one of existential default. I'll turn things over to Dr. Satchidanandan now to also talk about our anthology, Singing in the Dark.
Uh, yeah, it was in fact Dr. Nishi Chawla who, for the first time, suggested this idea of an anthology to me. And yes, I was responsible for naming it Singing in the Dark, Brecht being one of my very dear poets and playwrights. And we worked together to obtain poetry from as many countries as possible. As you can see, we have poets from more than 30 countries. We have 127 poets in the collection. In fact, we got more, but we couldn't accommodate all of them in the limited pages that were offered to us by Penguin Random House. Obviously, they had their own limitations, but we were quite happy that they were ready to accommodate almost all the poets, even though not all the poems. And these poems, as you have already seen, are they have a wide range of themes, a wide range of approaches, worldviews, forms. So in terms of subject matter, in terms of approach, and in terms of form, I think the anthology represents a great diversity of the kind of contemporary poetry that is being written today. And we have tried to bring together, as already you must have experienced, the different articulations of various kinds of moods that we all pass through and are perhaps still passing through because of the pandemic. There were moods of solitude, moods of absolute despair. There was trauma, and there were also sometimes moments of pleasure. or when you looked out the window and saw the birds, the butterflies you had never seen, and nature was in full bloom, even though we were imprisoned by her, and we were destined to at least transient loneliness. So the anthology is an attempt to bring together these different approaches, and also, in some sense, provide some hope to the people who read it, and the people who are in some sense victims of the trauma that the pandemic has brought. And we hope that our effort has been to some extent at least useful to the people who have suffered from the trauma of these very, very strange times.
Yes, true. With COVID-19 upending how we learn and collaborate, even as the deeper effects of the pandemic accelerate the need for cross-disciplinary solutions, the creativity and the power of poetry to make connections has never been felt more urgent, because poetry is a discourse constructed around the principle, the kind of, the epistemological principle of the unique that provides its readers with specific insights into individualized personal human experiences and linguistic expression. And poetry has particular value in promoting multiculturalism and the understanding of human diversity. It can provide moments of contact among individuals living in diverse communities. So, this powerful and moving collection of poems stretches across the boundaries of skin color, language, ethnicity, religion, to give voice to the experiences of living in these unprecedented times. I think I would like to invite, and we'll follow an alphabetical order, though Dr. Satchidanandan and I'll kind of read our poems, at the end. I'll invite Asmaa Azaizeh now to read her poems. Very briefly to reintroduce Asmaa. Yes, she's a Palestinian poet, well-known Palestinian poet, journalist and cultural manager based in Haifa, Israel. For several years, Asmaa worked as a journalist for Palestinian and Arabic newspapers, as well as being a presenter for television and radio. She currently works as a freelance writer for cultural magazines and as the artistic manager of Fatouche, a bar and art gallery in Haifa. Over to you, Asmaa. Please read your poem from our anthology, Singing in the Dark.
Forgot I'm muted. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nish, and thank you, Satchidanandan. Thank you, City Scripts, for the invitation. I would like to read one of the poems from the anthology called Reading Biographies of it's an time of pandemic, reading biographies of prophets. Okay. I am a great admirer of the lives of prophets. Reading them is like buying a lottery ticket. The long sauce with your inner and words no you then teacherlet and your frogs you chase from the heart all the anguish of mountains. You rid the world of its habit of eating its own waste. Gentlemen, this is not a game, not some trick to write a trifling poem, not some ramble in a passing valley. The prophets worked hard at it. They saw so clearly, their eyes dried up, and they spoke the words that have not left our lips for thousands of years. I want to speak like them, but my imagination is the size of a mouse hole, and all its bright, quick mice were found slaughtered at its door. I want to say a word about slaughter, about the slaughtered tents in slaughtered lands, about their residents who fell from their mothers already slaughtered, about the mothers slaughtered in warehouses and wells like hens with the knives of their children. Gentlemen, this is not a game. This is infrared or ultraviolet. Even acid cannot touch it. We must be prophets or madmen to see it. I want to say a word about my indifference to the nation, about my sadness and the way it clashes with this age of springs fabricating hope. I do not fabricate hope. I wash the brains of my friends and I tell them this nation is the size of a mouse hole, and I drag them to the plain door. I want to say who have no planes, to those to whose they cannot be dragged, and when they go out and search for one, are slaughtered and return on ice like vegetables. But I will say nothing, for my neck is short and I cannot see the bottom of the well. My life is nothing but a looping line between home and work and back. On my way, I see girls hopping onto buses with the lightness of hens and lottery tickets darkening the city skies and slaughtered prophets picked by flies. Thank you.
Wonderful. So powerful, Asmaa Azaizeh. You know, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis' words. No one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. Asmaa Azaizeh, would you like to kind of comment on your own poem? You know, just briefly, what inspired you to write a poem like this, and you know, what makes the lives of prophets so compelling for you?
Actually, maybe I would reflect on this poem, shedding light on what you just said, Nisha, about the dark times we live in. Because I forgot exactly what inspired me to write this poem, but I do realize now when we talk about the pandemic that what made or what is still making the pandemic harder for some nation is politics. What makes the pandemic what in its shape now in India or Palestine or Yemen, what makes it so different from Sweden or from Holland or whatever, is the really dark political situation some nations are facing and struggling in. So maybe what I wanted to say about the life of prophets is that this ideal image that we used to learn at schools, or we used to believe as children about this ideal life of sanity and a moral, extremely moral, completely ideal, moral images of people is not the reality we live in. And I think that what makes these times really dark for us now. You see, I'm speaking now from Palestine. This situation of the pandemic and of the vaccine in Palestine is so horrible. The occupation on Gaza and Palestine in general is times, and this political situation is making the times much darker even than regular lockdown in some northern country where people they sit in their homes, they can get vaccinated whenever they want or whenever their countries want, and they are safe in their homes. They are not starving, and they are not killed, and they are not under rockets in Syria or whatever. So these things make really the whole image or the whole scenery much darker. Nishi.
I'm glad you raised this, about political hostilities, political differences across the globe. And it doesn't help, of course, a lot of developed countries, including the United States, is facing this kind of, huge crisis, and getting the vaccine has become a political tool of sorts, of course, and it doesn't help in any way, for us to kind of be divided in political ways, and for all of that to be foregrounded now in the darkest of times. So thank you, Asmaa, for bringing this out, this very crucial issue. And I would request the organizers to kind of see, because sometimes your voice did get disrupted, and I hope I don't know if my own voice is getting disrupted. But Asmaa, would you also like to read another poem of your choice from our anthology?
Okay, yeah. I actually read most of the poems, maybe, and I was not sure if you and Sachi will read at the end. You just mentioned that, but I want you to allow me to read this very short poem by Satchidanandan.
Good.
Am I allowed? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm gonna read a poem called The Train. Mm-hmm. The train is going to my village, but I am not in it. Its rails are inside me. Its wheels are on my chest, and its whistle is my scream. I won't be there when it comes back to take me, but my breath will travel, seated on its roof, guarding my crops. As the train stops at my village, my life will enter my body and ride my waiting bicycle. Along the old familiar lanes, my children will come running as they hear its bell. Abu is here, Abu is here. In which language can I tell them? It is my dead body that has arrived, of heaven or of hell. I'm somewhere in between. Let the well talk, or the bond. If water refuses to speak, let my life dwell within a crow. On the drumstick tree, on my courtyard, and tell them the truth. I love this poem a lot.
Yes. Thank you to you and to Dr. Satchidanandan also for writing it. And of course, a poem can feel especially alive when you read it to an audience. And it also transmutes a different kind of power on the page. Asmaa, I would love you to read, just a bit of your own poem in your own language. I know it'll be kind of, powerful to our ears, even though we may not be able to understand
so
it.
Maybe I will read a small paragraph. Yeah.
Please.
Okay. أنا معجبة جدا بسير الأنبياء. قراءتها تشبه شراء ورقة يانصيب. ثمة فانتازيا طويلة عن حياة هانئة. فارغة حتى الكمال، متأملة لدرجة أنك قد تسمع الله بأم أذنك، وقد تلقن كلاما ولا في خيال إنسي، وقد ترى ألوانا فوق بنفسجية وتحت حمراء، وقد تكلم ضفدعا، وقد تزيح عن قلبك ألم جبل بأكمله، وقد تخلص العالم من عادته في أكل برازه. هذه ليست لعبة يا محترمين، ليست نزهة لكتابة قصيدة تافهة، ليست هيمان يوم في واد عابر. تأمل الأنبياء كثيراً حتى صاروا كذلك، تبصروا وجفت حدقاتهم ضفاف بعضها حتى قالوا لنا ما ظللنا نردده آلاف السنين. أنا أيضاً أريد أن أقول كلاماً كهذا، فخيالي بحجم جحر فأر، فئرانه اللماحة المتذاكية وجدت مذبوحة على بابه. أريد أن أقول كلاماً عن الذبح، عن الخيام التي ذبحت في بلاد مذبوحة، عن أصحابها الذين سقطوا من فروج أمهاتهم مذبوحين أصلاً. Thank you.
Thank you, Asmaa. Had I not known that this was a poem written by you, it still felt, like a poem to my ears and to my soul. So thank you very much. We now turn thank you. We now turn to an Indian poet, a bilingual poet, Sarabjeet Garcha. He's a poet and translator of English and Hindi. He is the author of 4 poetry collections, including A Clock in the Far Past. He is also the co-founder and editorial director of the multilingual publishing house Copper Coin. Over to you, Sarabjeet Garcha. Would you please like to read your poem?
Thank you, Dr. Chawla, and thank you, Dr. Satchidanandan. You'll notice, maybe Dr. Satchidanandan will notice some difference in my voice. I am under another lockdown for the past 4 days. I'm locked in this room under self-quarantine after my 5-day-long travel from Maharashtra. So yeah, this is another phase of lockdown for me. So, and also a good time to remember and celebrate the publication of this wonderful volume by you and Dr. Satchidanandan. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll read this poem written now. Maybe I can say that this is a complimentary poem to the poems read by Asmaa. She talked about the lives of the prophets, and here in this poem, I talk about a slice of life of the foremost guru of Sikhism, that is Guru Nanak and his companion. Mostly, you see, there's another tradition where we dismiss lifelong companions as sidekicks. But Nanak's companion was a significant part of his life and journeys, Mardana. So this poem is titled Stop Over. Nanak in the ruins outside a village. The word come is dearer to him than go. So instead of go, Mardana, he says, come, Mardana, make yourself at home. The night a wordless companion, they both take in Cicada's song, a music much older than the walls gnawed off by that beast known as time. Give the rabab a rest, he hears Nanak say. Mardana nestles the instrument into what must have once been an alcove for toy, bangle, turban, and diya alike. A fallen roof beam for a pillow, the dirt floor for a bed, and the still air for a blanket was much more than the pupils spurned by a whole village could have asked for. He tries, but can't take his eyes off the cold mud stove in the corner. His lips remember the taste of a river, his hands, the clasp of the master, who can let go of the whole world, but never of those who choose to rise. His only wish tonight is to find a ruse to forgive, a means to fill his eyes with the sleep of the Guru, to see that which never sleeps, his ears awake to the one voice repeating, "Come, Mardana, dream time's over, arise." Thank you.
Wonderful. Very nice, Sarabjeet Garcha. It also reminds me of the British romantic poet Wordsworth, William Wordsworth. We read his poetry, and of course, I also taught in Delhi University for, about 15, 18 years as a tenured professor. So I read and would love Wordsworth. He wrote that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. Would you like to comment on, this as well as your own poem? Would you like to kind of, create?
Yeah, I agree with Wordsworth, and Wordsworth has been my favorite poet from childhood. You see, maybe it was more to do with the alliteration of his name. We still remember his poem, The Cuckoo, and I think that was the first poem that touched me as a child. I have vivid memories of the poem. I can even recall the time when my class teacher narrated that poem. You see what the quality and color of light was that day. You see, and how the birds were singing in the trees outside my classroom. I can remember that. So yeah, I agree with that. Uh, I have been obsessed with Nanak for maybe more than a year because I've been translating his work, selected works into English. So you see, it feels like if you go to Lucknow, there's this Imam Bada where at one corner of the maze, if you stand and whisper, your whisper travels to another corner, you see, through the maze. So I feel that Nanak's word traveled through the maze and the distance of years, you see, and it's as if he's whispering into my ears sometimes. So I had this image of him and his companions sitting outside when they were not allowed let in the village, and this has happened with them. There are many stories about Nanak being not welcome in some villages. So when I was under lockdown, you see, I thought of Nanak and I saw him locked out of the village. So that was the idea behind this poem. And this poem, it's like it came in a dream and I wrote it down. And yeah, of course, I tweaked and made up some things, but most of it was actually a dream poem.
Yes, and yes, so thought-provoking also. It also makes me think, that poetry, while poetry can provide a counterweight to the desire to collectivize, generalize, we always think of poetry as, something like bringing out our individual selves. Uh, it, uh, Poetry can also at the same time promote unity as an ideal and function through the inability to differentiate between the group and the individual member of the collective. That's what your poem kind of struck me as, that it's bringing people together, the togetherness, the bondedness, of our humanity. So wonderful, Sarabjeet. Would you like to read another poem
Yeah,
from our anthology, Singing in the
I'll
Dark?
read this poem by my favorite Marathi poet, Mangesh Narendra Kale. He's not just a multiple award-winning poet, but he's also the most widely imitated poem in Maharashtra, poet in Maharashtra today. He is also a trendsetter in the sense that when he starts a trend, and you see it lasts for years. So this is one of his poems, my favorite. In Marathi, it is called At. I've translated it as the deal. He heaved his shadow over his shoulder and started walking. His shadow heaved him over its shoulder and started walking. The deal between the two is to keep talking. Whoever stops will have his head smashed into 1,000 pieces. Hanging the shadow on a tree, he can walk out of the situation. Even then, the talking won't stop. Heaving the shadow over its shoulder, the tree will start walking, or the tree's shadow will heave the tree over its shoulder. The deal between the two is to keep walking. Whoever stops will have its head smashed into 1,000 pieces. Possibly, the tree will stop after entrusting the shadow to the wind. Even then, the sequence won't change. The shadow on its shoulder, the wind will keep rushing. Or the wind on its shoulder, the shadow of the wind will keep rushing constantly. The deal between the two is to keep rushing. Whoever stops will have its head smashed into 1,000 pieces.
Intensely metaphorical indeed. Thank you so much for reading it out. And I cannot help reiterate William Wordsworth's, what he wrote about poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origins from emotions recollected in tranquility. Both your poem and the one that you read out, strike me as a kind of, maybe a concatenation, a collision between, something like an explosion poet, and at the same time, poetry as an emotion recollected in tranquility. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Sarabjeet Garcha.
Thank you very much.
Yes, all of you are so well known in India. And I turn now to Anjum Katyal. Anjum Katyal has been the chief editor of Seagull Books Calcutta, Kolkata, and editor Seagull Theatre Quarterly. As the editorial head of a specialist arts publisher, she was responsible for a broad range of books on art and culture. She's been involved in organizing several exhibitions of contemporary art. She has a background in education and teacher training. A published poet, she also sings the blues. And I couldn't resist looking you up, and you were so wonderful, Anjum Katyal. I saw you singing the blues on YouTube, so it was just a wonderful experience. I know you write on theatre and visual arts as well. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking you, Nishi and Sachida, for putting together this anthology, because it's really the immense range of voices it's and coming together in one project like this. It's just like you were saying, it's metaphorical to another level. It talks of how individual we all are as people and get what kind of common things link us. And what Asma was saying about how varied the whole experience of the lockdown and the threat of the pandemic has been, depending on where you are located, in which society you're living, in which segment of society you are, in which country you are living. I think that is such an important thing to remember, that, and it is this variety of experiences that we read in the book. We see fear, we see suffering, we see a peace, we see inner introspection, we see a huge range of different kinds of experiences and responses. And I think it's really important to remember that, and that's why I feel that this book is a remarkable document that will, years later, speak to what happened for this particular year, or if it's going to be a couple of years, I don't know. So the poem that I thought I'd read today, that I have submitted, is called Roaming. Roaming. The miracle of space that is the mind. Memory, the heart's treasure chest, with its rooms, courtyards, gardens, streets, cities, valleys, banks, and shores, the same street over decades, the same room over a lifetime. We visit, we linger, we return. And we are warmed once more by the sunlight slanting in through that window, stirred by the shadows resting in those corners, cooled by that stone floor under our feet, the curve of a road, the swell of a wave breaking jade fragile on the sand, the heat of a rock we rest against, the intimate geographies of desire, the infinite geography of the mind.
So wonderful. So wonderful. Uh, would you, this kind of also brings me back to what I read about Kierkegaard when he wrote about how anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And maybe you could read another poem for us, Anjum, please, Miss Anjum
Yes,
Katyal.
certainly. Yeah. I was thinking of reading a poem by Ashwani Kumar. We seem to have featured lots of Indian poets in this particular session. Very happy about that. The poem I thought of reading is Flamingos in Early Summer. Nobody thought, in the terrible days of solitude, herds of jobless migrants with clay brick masks would suddenly arrive in the lockdown city. With them, the Armenian flamingos also descended, flock after flock, in the maggoty shadows of early summer. From their sweaty pink wings, dry mustard leaves kept falling into the freshly made shelter homes. Flapping their empty stomachs, slowly they filled the sky with their hungry nasal cries for food and water. Infuriated with the smell of infectious blood, affluent city dwellers turned against themselves, speaking with strange voices or stones in their moments of self survival. That's it.
Very nice. Thank you. Any
I
comment?
thought it was a really powerful the way he conflates the birds, the migration, and the migrant workers who have also had to flee and seek shelter.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reading out two very thought-provoking poems. Uh, we have a poet from California now, Sophia Naz. She's a bilingual poet, essayist, author, editor, and translator. She's been nominated twice for the Pushcart Prize. Well, that's really an honor, I would imagine, Sophia. In 2016 for creative nonfiction, and in 2018 for poetry. Her work features in numerous literary journals and anthologies, and her poetry collections are Peripheries, Pointillism, and Date Palms. Her latest book, which intrigues me a lot, and I promised to buy a copy of it, has been published by Penguin Random House India only. It's a biography of your mom. Wow. Shehnaz, it's titled Shehnaz, A Tragic True Tale of Royalty, Glamour, Heartbreak, published in 2019. Over to you, Sophia Naz.
Thank you so much, Nishi, and thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking both you and Satchida for putting together this amazing polyphony of voices, and it's truly a reflection of who we are as humans. This multiplicity of voices. So I'm going to read my poem, Ghost. Just a moment, the old gods say, we are coming to lateness. Silence, shadow-shawled. Do you not see our symmetry scrawled in your mirror? Grave length, 2 handspans wide. While you pace, let us place our diadems so. Lost in your address, gods, there's no end to its numinous mucus, scolding, scar scaffolding, dancing cheek to cheek with the night of numberless hours, clock face, no hands holding long knives of dream. Rains making reliquary clot while you talk, oceans, mouth froth, thick spackle on mortuary walls, corridors of wasted youth. Tell me again how paradise was lost in a poisonous smile, infected blanket. I'm lying here, pinned to your story, gullible Gulliver, while Lilliput takes over. Is not sleep next of kin to death? Sing me a lullaby, gods, again from your mouths of stone.
Very nice, Sophia. Any comments very briefly about, the genesis of your poem, its thematic message?
So this poem I came about when I read that the entire weight of all the virus in the world was about a gram, and you could fit 1 trillion coronaviruses in a raindrop. So I titled it Ghost, and the G is in parentheses because it's signifying that we, the human species, are hosts to a deadly virus, which is as invisible as a ghost. But at the same time, the virus is also a host, because a host is a large number of, any large quantity is a host. So we are hosts to a host of viruses, and that has control over us. Excuse me. It has control over us in the same manner that it has a power over life and death, just like a god. So the poem it's a kind of dialogue between helplessness and power. No, we are helpless in the face of the virus, but there are other things inside it as well. The other ghosts that inhabit it are the ghosts of empire. There are the myths that, blind us. And it is, in the end, it's our own subconscious. It's a cry at the heart of the poem, a cry of anguish. I'm lost in your address, gods. There's a perplexion and a helplessness and an anguish. So there are many things, and I've sort of wrapped it all up, a kind of a multi-layered thing within a thing in the whole poem. So
nice, very nice. Yeah, Ulrich Ibsen also called us ghosts. And you have also kind of, talked about how a ghost has devastated and impacted our lives in terrible ways. Would you like to read another poem, please, Sophia?
Yes, I'm going to read a poem by Sampurna Chatterjee. And this is titled, Just Think When You Are Cured. Collapsed lung, child, an unusual opacity in the left lung, kidney removed, small bowel follow through, elbow dislocation, angiogram hand. Lung details disappeared, no air, coral blooming inside bodies, nocturnal and malignantly hushed, pinned down by neat arrows and labels in that black and white place of dread. You are in Michigan, I in Mumbai. In seconds, you will come to me, fractured, beat, distended, the merciless eyes of the beast in the radiologist's machine. It is the beginning of healing to know what is wrong. I will not let it crush me, pump me breathless, bellowing. Your wrist is adorable, a bracelet of bone. The northern lights blaze in your lung. Just think, when you are cured, we will marvel at how pretty they are. Those pictures of the country we carry inside ourselves. Just think of the joy of returning to that heedlessness, the enormous ingratitude of the well. But until then, picture me counting 1 to 37, each second twisting down the phone line like an absurd postponement of pain. Living is a kind of mourning too, to hold what the dead have lost.
Thank you so much, Sophia Naz. Thank you for reading it so beautifully as well. Well, our next poet is my co-editor, Dr. Satchidanandan, who really needs no introduction, at least I know in India, and to our readers or to our listeners at City Script. He is Dr. K. Satchidanandan. Over to you, Dr. Satchidanandan. Would you like to read one of your very powerful poems, please? I would not like to reintroduce and kind of, talk about all that you've done, your enormous poetic contribution to humanity. Please.
Thank you, Nishi, for that very generous introduction. In fact, I am really afraid that I'm having more than my share because Asma, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect Asma to read one of my poems in this panel. But since it is my turn, I read the poem that I had promised to read, which is very different from the poem she read, which was about migrants, the condition of migrants. But this is more about the human condition, particularly in our traumatic times. It's titled On This Earth. This was written also in Malayalam, like all of my poems. We landed on Earth from different stars. That's why we speak different languages. Each word carries the aura of the memories of the stars we left. In sleep, we travel to those glittering homes. There, we speak to our forefathers like geckos that know every one of its walls. We wake up to discover it's stardust on our skins. 2. From which star did you come? I ask, watching the blue dust on her shoulders at dawn. She stares, jealous, at the red dust on my breast. We are now characters in some science fiction. Even our heads do not look human. 3. As we die, we return to the stars we left. We will forget our sojourn on Earth. We will float in space as weightless souls until we get another body and another language. 4. I want to be reborn on Earth, this time as a tree. You will be a bird perched on its bough. I will recognize you by the blue dust on your wings, and you, me, with the red dust on my bark. This time, we won't quarrel. I'll exchange my fruits for your song. There won't be humans to see or hear it. Butterflies, only butterflies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was such a treat to hear you read your poem. And for paucity of time, I think, we can discuss your poem sometime later, but I would really like to kind of, get to know your kind of, how you would explicate your own poem. Would you like to read another poem, please, Dr. Satchidanandan?
Yeah, I'll read this poem, Marius Celaru's poem. He's a Romanian poet. He has published over 40 books, including novels, poetry, literary criticism, essays, and translations. I won't go on, but he is a very important Romanian poet of our time. I love this poem, like many other poems in the anthology. It's just one of them. It's called Love During Quarantine. The town breathes fear. The moon hides behind the clouds. The people behind the walls. The streets are enveloped in the dark. Words have hidden in former times. The oppressive air hides hope. For a while we have been together. Two thoughts cracked by the times at their margins. The worm of silence grows, the walls between them are like our palms. Alone, separated, we appear at the window. The town is darker than the night. From your eyelashes, older tears run to me from a glass of loneliness drunk by you and me. I feel your head, I feel your heart quiver. I caress you and wipe the fright from your face. When the moon drives away the cloud from her eyes, spreading light upon us, we already kiss. From another window, someone begins singing a love song. Suddenly, the town is a large singing heart. The air, a fresh orchard under the rain's palms. When the song dies, there remains the light within us. It smells of silence. So beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nish.
Thank you. Thank you for reading Romanian poet Maris Celeru's poem as well as your own. And both poems somehow remind me of Emily Dickinson's words. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. Well, readers, listeners, and our audience, I'd like to read my own poem now, Inside Myself. The virus licks my torn soul, guilt-tripping me. I sing a love song to it, tempting the faint thump, causing my heart to fissure its fatty lumps. Pretend I live on a moon of my own landing. Turn my flesh inside out, listen to the chirping of birds, amazed that so much beauty could still exist amid club-like spikes that crush the breathing soul, lavender storms that hit, unfounded hopes cluster phylogenetically, a pestilence that asks for enormous surcharges, lethal as the protean cry of daggers, stabbing me yet again. Quietly slithering out, a warlike stratagem, as birds orchestrate their cheerful songs to each other, embraced in positive sense RNA, the hard truths that no flowers on our windowsills would relive, proteins that slice human voices, sliced lungs pause, then breathe. When I follow its replication pattern, somewhere a flood of tears ensue, attached to a host receptor, slyly pursuing a purpose-driven path. Winter turns into stunned spring, and yet the stalk of the spike molecule sticks, digs deep within, encodes hollowed dreams, hollowed out. In the open fields, the birds shriek with intense, tormented sounds, adopt a transmembrane-like structure, and more are rendered mute, transfixed fear, packaging signals of sliding down, motionless companions that express a fear, triggering viral particles, spreading out, binding domains of dazed displeasure, disbelief, a tissue culture, receptors and protein that inject so much, a solar vision that gives me a new calm, a prayer that sparks nucleocapsids of refined pleasure, gone. I struggle with myself again, umpteen times more. Thank you. Well, our listeners and our audience for CityScript, we have not forgotten you. So if you have any questions, could you please address it now? Dr. Satchidanandan and I will try to respond.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but there's a lot of interested listeners. And I feel somehow poetry is one of those things which is just nice to just take in, especially something like this. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, because, when we put together this festival this year, our hope was really to bring people together to make sense of last year. I don't know if we can make sense of it, but to sort of experience together what we all went through. And I feel poetry is such a lovely way to do that. We've heard so much, and thank you all so much for making the time. And also special thanks to Elizabeth Kurvilla. I just sort of pinged her and said, hey, will you be interested? And she immediately sort of set the ball rolling, and within a couple of days, everyone was on board. So thank you all so much. It's just been a great pleasure to have you all. I know some of you had to wake up quite early in the States. Thank you very much for doing that. Yeah, it's been just wonderful. Thank you to everybody who joined us from different parts of the world. We hope you had a great time. And we really hope to see you in person sometime soon, hopefully at CityScripts 2022. So thank you very much. And we'll sign off for this year, if that's okay with all of you. Thank you. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all.